2 decades ago, the basic architecture of the K-12 teaching job was relatively straightforward. You planned lessons, you taught the content, you graded the work, and you managed the room. Today, that job description is obsolete. State and federal governments have layered on continuous mandates, expecting a single general education teacher to simultaneously act as an instructor, a special education case manager, a language development specialist, and a compliance monitor. Look at the physical space we provide for this work. This is a standard classroom layout. The physical footprint, the number of desks, and the hours in a school day have barely changed in decades. This is a cold mathematical breakdown of a public service operating on flawed operational economics. We modernized the moral and legal obligations of the profession, but we froze the structural architecture required to actually execute them. The result is a job that contradicts its own design. In 2017, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its ruling in the Andrew F. case. The decision raised the federal standard for special education, mandating that individualized education programs must be reasonably calculated to enable meaningful student progress. Operationally, the general education room must now be instructionally durable enough to accommodate complex learning and behavioral needs. Simultaneously, California adopted the English Learner Roadmap, shifting from English-only schooling to embedded multilingual integration. Language acquisition is no longer treated as an isolated task for a pull-out specialist. Differentiated language support is now embedded directly into the daily execution of the general classroom teacher. Lawmakers also passed anti-exclusion discipline reforms, severely restricting suspensions for willful defiance. Finally, the accountability model shifted. Teachers are now monitored across a complex matrix of subgroup outcomes, chronic absenteeism, and climate indicators via the California School Dashboard. Providing meaningful special education access, protecting English learners, and reducing exclusionary discipline are justified goals. The failure occurred when the system operated under the assumption that these mandates were operationally cheap to implement at the classroom level. To see how those mandates collide with reality, we can look at the actual collective bargaining agreement for the Hesperia Unified School District as a proxy for the state. This diagram represents the exact parameter of a teacher's contractual workday, a strict container of 392 minutes. That same contract guarantees class sizes up to 33 students in elementary and 37 students in secondary core classes. The instructional container is filled to the brim. Within a single section of those 37 students, the academic spread is vast. A single teacher is responsible for moving grade-level learners forward, while simultaneously differentiating curriculum for students reading multiple grade levels behind. In a zero-exclusion environment, significant behavioral issues require the teacher to stop that academic instruction entirely to perform crisis triage. When one professional manages 37 individuals, infinite legal mandates cannot fit into finite time. Every new compliance duty directly cannibalizes the existing pool of scarce instructional minutes. A common assumption is that the retention crisis stems entirely from poverty wages. In districts like Hesperia, modern teacher salaries start at roughly $70,000 and top out around $140,000. In absolute terms, the pay is not low. This chart shows the national median wage for elementary teachers compared to other heavily regulated public service roles. Teachers sit roughly in the $62,000 range, parallel to social workers, but trail significantly behind registered nurses, who earn upwards of $93,000. The distinction lies in the structural execution of the work. Hospitals and social service agencies typically utilize distributed staffing models. Caseload management, crisis response, and compliance documentation are handled by different dedicated roles, or they are constrained by strict client caps. The modern K-12 teacher executes all of those specialized functions at the exact same time, while maintaining continuous, live supervision of 35 youths. Current compensation fails to reflect the concentrated, simultaneous nature of these responsibilities. If districts continually argue they lack the budget to lower class sizes or increase planning time, how do they handle the friction caused by these compounding state mandates? They purchase temporary external solutions. They buy third-party contractors, software platforms, and external consulting, relying on what we can call vendor capital. Look at this board agenda from Upland Unified. The district approved a single contract for $1 million with a third-party vendor, Catapult Learning, to handle summer instruction and program management. This pattern repeats everywhere. Antioch Unified signed a $44,000 contract to tutor foster youth, while Hesperia budgeted over $620,000 in a single year for external professional development. For a district board, vendor capital is politically clean. Contracts are temporary, easily measurable on a ledger, and completely reversible if state funding drops. Compare that to structural capital. Permanent changes, like lowering class ratios or altering the salary schedule to guarantee more prep time, are permanent obligations that are highly difficult to unwind. The infusion of nearly $60 billion in federal ESSER funds artificially accelerated this trend. Districts were handed massive amounts of temporary money that had to be spent quickly, flooding the system with short-term consulting agreements. Districts spend millions to pay outside experts to manage behavior systems or coach staff in the exact specialized tasks that teachers are already legally required to execute daily. Purchasing external services creates the public optics of addressing a problem, while deliberately avoiding the heavier, permanent work of redesigning an obsolete daily schedule. District leaders often claim that redesigning the school day to provide structural relief is a financial fantasy. The data proves otherwise. We can model the exact cost of time using Hesperia's own contractual figures, specifically their over-contract hourly rate of $54.61. This equation outlines the actual cost of relief. If a district paid its teachers for an additional 30 minutes of protected preparation time every single workday, it adds up to 92 hours a year. That comes out to roughly $5,024 per teacher per year. Take that single $1 million vendor contract from Upland Unified and apply it to this formula. That single contract is mathematically equivalent to funding 30 minutes of daily protected prep time for 199 teachers for an entire year. Hesperia's $622,000 professional development budget is roughly equivalent to funding that same daily 30 minutes of protected time for an additional 124 teachers. The capital required to structurally redesign the teacher's day already exists inside the system, currently misallocated into temporary vendor contracts. Broadening access for special education, protecting language learners, and rejecting exclusionary discipline were correct and necessary evolutions in policy. The current retention crisis is an engineering failure, the result of an impossible organizational design. To sustain these mandates, schools must stop blindly adding obligations and begin structurally redesigning the job. That requires materially lowering class sizes, building protected intervention blocks into schedules, and fully funding in-house case managers. We cannot demand a modernized, highly specialized, multidisciplinary profession while stubbornly continuing to staff and schedule it like an instructional gig from the 1990s.